Hey everybody, it's Dick here. Today I'm on my new Triumph Street Cup. I've had it for about, what day is it today? I think I've had it for about, this is the 4th day I've had it. I've put about 70 miles on it or so. There's a very specific break-in you have to keep to first 500 miles if you can't get it over 4,000 RPM. The way this bike is geared isn't that much of a problem actually. 5th gear, 4,000 RPM, you're going about 60 odd miles an hour, so it's usable while you're breaking it in and babying it, unlike a lot of other bikes that it's just so hard to stay within those break-in parameters. Anyway, what can I say? I bought a Street Cup. I never even looked at a Street Cup before I put my money on the barrelhead, and that's a very odd thing for me. I research the hell out of, well, I don't research the hell. It's a very odd thing for me because I obsess over a bike before I buy it, and there was absolutely no obsession, no research. It was an impulse buy, if it was such a thing. My wife buys me motorcycles every couple of Father's Day, and she said this year I was able to pick out a motorcycle, and usually what I do is I sell one of the bikes I'm not using all that much to subsidize an upgrade. So I sold a Ducati Monster to get me into my GS. I sold my Transalp to get me into the Ducati Monster. So I was softly putting my bikes on the market, the ones that I thought I could live without. And I had a short list. I had about 3 to 5 bikes on my short list. The Triumph Scrambler XE, the R9T Urban GS. The Katana was on the short list for a while until I rode it, and that's just too much bike for me. And I was also down at the Triumph dealer looking. I don't have a lot of experience with Triumphs, and I've kind of avoided Triumph defiantly because of how kind of popular it's become, and kind of it's a bit like, I don't know, it felt a bit posery. I know a lot of people are going, you've picked the most poser Triumph bike on the lineup, and I agree, I certainly have. But like I said, we'll get to that. So I've been avoiding Triumphs. My wife really likes a Triumph. I think Triumphs are pieces of jewelry. They're really, they're show pieces. They're really nice to look at, and that's why women like them, my wife included, and she's interested in a bobber. So I went and I test rode the bobber just to see if it's worth her time. And I was actually quite impressed with the bobber, but it's a pricey bike. I mean, it is expensive. 12 grand for a motorcycle is a lot of money, but it kind of endeared me to Triumphs to try the rest of the line. And while I was down there poking around about the Triumph, I turned my head and there was this shiny row of Street Cups. There were like 8 of them. And they were under the lights, and they were in pride of place. I mean, I think I've said it before, it shows you the power of a dealership. Because in pictures, the Street Cup is not an impressive looking bike. I sent my wife a picture saying, oh my God, look at this bike. And she was like, eh. And then I looked at the picture and I was like, yeah, eh. But in person, this thing is seductive. But I said, I knew the Street line. I knew the Street Twin and the Street Scrambler and the Street Cup were about 9 grand and up. So I knew if I was going to spend 9 grand on a motorcycle, I would buy an XSR. I'd buy an XSR, or I'd buy a R9T. So 9 grand, I'm not looking at a Street Triumph. And then right there on the sticker, 6,700 pounds. That is Royal Enfield Interceptor money. Royal Enfield Interceptor 650 Twin, or a Heritage Classic or Modern Classic Triumph 900 for the same money. They didn't have one to test ride, so I took the T100 out, which shares the same engine and transmission, and I was further enticed. So I went back to the dealer, and while I was standing there talking about the bike with the dealer, 4 guys came in separately, 4 different guys, completely different walks of life, from how they were dressed, how they were handling themselves. Each of them sat on the bike and went to 4 different salesmen's desks and bought one on the spot. It was, I have to admit, I was caught up. I felt like I was missing. If I didn't buy one, I felt like I was going to miss out on something. So I called the wife and said, what do you say? And she said, Happy Father's Day. And here we are, Street Cup. Now you would think without a test ride and a bike that I had known nothing about, there's going to be some instant buyer's remorse when I get on it to ride it home. Now, there was a bit of regret because after 2 weeks of beautiful sun, it was pouring rain when I went to pick it up, so bad omen. But I have not had any buyer's remorse. I am fairly forgiving to motorcycles, but I haven't had to be forgiving on this thing. This thing is a dream to ride. I called the Royal Enfield Interceptor usable. This bike is very usable too. This bike is very accessible. And there's a lot of features on this bike that remind me of the Interceptor. The things I was let down about on the Interceptor, I'm not let down about on this bike. And I can tell that Royal Enfield had their eye on this street Bonneville line when they were designing the Interceptor. But what's nice is too, it's 5 gears, and the 5 gears kind of gave me pause, because what kind of bike these days doesn't have 6 gears? But the 5 gears gave me pause. But the way this engine is tuned, it is perfectly tuned for 5 gears. I'm never looking for a 6th gear on this bike. It's just really, really perfectly tuned through the rev range. There's torque all the way through it. Where on the newer version of this engine, or I should say the updated version of this engine, they gave it 10 more horsepower, but totally messed with the gearing, and you're out of oomph by the time you reach 3,000 RPM. So you're constantly looking for that next gear so that you can get up and feel that power of this high torque engine. I was concerned about filtering because of these stupid bar end mirrors, but not a problem so far. Getting in and out of the drive's gate is a little tight. There's some maneuvering that needs to happen, but that's all right. So what is this? What is this Street Cup? It's a street twin with some styling. It's got a Cafe Racer seat cowl off the back. It had drop bars, but I had them put the street twin handlebars on, so a bit more upright. I'm a little forward. I'm kind of almost in the same position as that Royal Enfield Interceptor, but the foot pegs are not in a uncomfortable spot. The foot pegs are a little further back than mid controls. They're kind of just behind mid controls. They're not rear set controls. You're leaned a little forward, but not resting completely on your wrists or your hands. There's a bit of a sporty position to it, but there's a good rider triangle. I heard that term. They use it a lot on Indian web posts, and I kind of like that term, rider triangle. There's a good rider triangle. The seat height is incredibly low. I mean, it's insanely low. Look at that. I can do a dance with both legs. I mean, flat as all hell. So the accessibility is undeniable. It's extremely accessible bike, extremely usable bike. But it has that grunt that the Interceptor lacks all the way through. I keep comparing it to the Interceptor because I think this is what they were trying to make. It's got a little windscreen there, so the wind is a nice, smooth, unnoticeable wind. It's not a bothersome wind. And it just roars to life when you pull that accelerator on. It just hums. It's a thrum underneath you. But that little windshield does quite a bit for keeping the wind comfortable. It's nearly unnoticeable. Not fighting it at all. What can I say? It's a pretty purist motorcycle. They have traction control and ABS. ABS is on all the time. Traction control you can turn off, I guess, to do burnouts. There's no rider modes. It's as simple a motorcycle as you can get, tacking on all the latest technology that they do lately. I kind of like the purity of it. I mean, the one bike that I have that has a fair amount of technology, the BMW GS, I don't use half the things that it offers. I'm happy to have it, but I don't use it. So it is a very purist motorcycle. But let's get back. This bike is a dash under 9 grand usually. They've discontinued the bike after the 2018-2019 manufacturing run. I happened to catch a fire sale on it. Would I spend 9 grand on this bike? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I would not spend 9 grand on this motorcycle. Would I spend 6 to 7 grand on this motorcycle? I obviously will. In a heartbeat. And that's where I think a lot of motorcycle companies have dropped a significant number of enthusiasts by having the huge expense of motorcycles at the outset and then expecting 200 pounds a pop on service. I think the dealership who sold me this saw, if we sell these things off, I think they bought 40 of them from the factory as leftovers. But if we buy all 40 of them and sell them at 6 to 7 grand, we're going to sell them in a heartbeat, and we're going to have 40 more customers. 40 more people doing stupid, unnecessary upgrades and tack-on accessories. 40 more people buying overpriced t-shirts and hats. 40 more people on the hook for scheduled maintenance annually. So the motorcycle as a loss leader is a pretty brilliant business plan, and I really wish that more motorcycle companies would consider that, especially these companies that are trying to get younger riders or new riders or returning riders. Harley-Davidson would get a legion of new customers if they sold a bike for 7 grand, but they won't. You know, keeping prices high is what keeps the premium brand or the premium mark in someone's mind. If something is accessible and affordable, it loses value in people's minds. But really, making it accessible to more customers is the premium mark worth the millions that you won't make. Anyway, I lucked out. Though I do have to start treating this like a 9 grand motorcycle, because I treat it like a 6 grand motorcycle. Though the first time I did ride it, it was in the rain, and I went home and watched it when the sun came out. Maybe that is a sign that I treat it with a bit more concern or value than I have other bikes. I don't think I've ever washed a motorcycle. Watched this one. Actually, I think I've watched this one twice now. I mean, look at this. Just the machining. You can see the cycling of the machine tool in there. It's not polished off, so you can appreciate the manufacture of it. These bejeweled clocks, everything has a quality to it. Even the headlight bucket stalks, they're just pretty to look at. So I can't say I'm converted to Triumph as a product, but I'm still put off by the premium price for it. I would not have bought this bike, and other than the bobber, any other Triumph bike for the asking price that they're making. But I find myself on one because it fits into my affordable motorcycling ethos. So it was the right place at the right time. And but for that fire sale that I was swept up in, I would not be riding a Street Cup. But I'm sure glad I am, because I am very much enjoying this bike. And you cannot fault the chorus of that engine. Wind becomes noticeable about 50 miles an hour, but again, it's a smooth wind. It's not something that disrupts you or buffets you all that much. I'm wearing a visored helmet today because it was the first one I grabbed. I was eager to catch some dryness. It's been raining since I got the bike, so I just happened to grab this. I'm in 4th gear, 3,000 RPM, and I'm riding right at 50 miles an hour, which is really quite great. It illustrates the gearing on this bike. I have lots of oomph left at 3,000 RPMs. It goes up to 8,000 RPM red line. It gets red at 7,000 RPMs on the dial. But I still got 3,000 usable RPMs, and I'm cruising at 50 in 4th gear, which means 5th gear is a usable highway gear. And we're about to find out. I'm on my way to the highway. But it's a usable highway gear. And there's so much grunt. Like I said, the torque goes all the way through the RPMs, all the way through the range of the gear. I'm in 5th gear, 60 miles an hour, 3,000 RPM. 3,000 usable RPMs to get me up to 70 and 80. I'm not going faster than that generally. 60 miles an hour, 3,200 RPM, so it's perfectly geared. I'm really impressed. I was not impressed with the updated engine and the updated gearing. I think they sacrificed a lot of character and usability by gaining 10 more horsepower. And it's what I've been saying about sweet spot motorcycles. My 2005 Yamaha FC6 sweet spot motorcycle. Pre-2019 CB500X by Honda, sweet spot motorcycle. The current, and maybe previous, but the current Suzuki SV650 sweet spot motorcycle. You buy those motorcycles in those eras and you are going to be a happy motorcyclist. And I kind of feel like the first edition 900 HT engine is one of those sweet spot motorcycles. 4th gear, 3,600 RPM, 60 miles an hour, Still got a lot there. I'm dropping to 5th because I got to keep it under 4,000 RPM. I'm at 65 at 3,500 RPMs, and I still got lots to go. I'm going 65 miles an hour, and the wind again has not become upsetting in the least. It's a kind of blustery day, and I'm going pretty quick, and the wind is negligible. It's a very, very, very accommodating motorcycle. Power where and when you want it and need it, but really it is very kind to its user. So I just returned to the dealership. They have one more Street Cup left. One more. It really was a fire sale. I'm really quite happy to have landed on that deal. I always miss out on the deals, I think. We're about to go on the motorway for the first time. I do have to keep it reined in, but we'll give a sense of what it's like on the motorway. Again, gets up to speed like a monster. It's great. Fourth gear, 55 miles an hour, 3,500 RPM. I'm accelerating, the wind is picking up but not upsetting. I'm over 60 now. I just dropped the 5th gear. 68 miles an hour, 3,600 RPM. Comes down from speed nicely too. I say let's go see how it works on the motorway, and we have congestion. But it also gives you a sense, I mean, it's a very low bike. It's a very low statured bike. But I'm sitting high enough to feel comfortable out in this traffic. I mean, there's lots of traffic on the road. This van in front of me is sending off some wind, but I don't feel unstable, and I'm not getting any wind around my head. This little windshield does a miraculous job at sending the wind up and over my head. Usually on a naked bike like this, if I'm wearing my visored helmet like I am today, I'm getting it right in the forehead and it's lifting my head. It's not happening. There we go. Keep it under 4,000 RPM. Under 3,900 RPM, I'm at 70 miles an hour in 5th gear. Are you kidding me? It's just so refreshing. They did it right on this engine. They got it wrong so soon after though. Very comfortable out on the motorway. I could do some long miles on this bike, I think. It's really windy through here, but this bike is sending the wind right over my shoulders, right over my head. Very comfortable. I just realized I've been cruising around in 4th gear. Still have another gear. It's one of those things where you're usually cruising around in 5th, and then you go looking for 6th, and you're surprised that 6th is there. The way this is geared, I'm cruising around on 4th, and then I realize there's a 5th gear here. It's really well done. Again, I wouldn't buy a Triumph Street for $9,000 or more. I don't think this bike is a $9,000 bike in my head, in my justification. But I do feel like it's worth a little more than what I paid for it. So I still feel like I got a bargain, even though I don't think it's worth what they're asking. So I'm at 5th gear, 65 miles an hour, 3,500 RPM. I'm noticing a dash of vibration in my throttle hand. I noticed that, I forget where I noticed that. I noticed on another Triumph, I think it was the XE, around the same cruising speed, my throttle hand was getting a bit buzzy. But I'm not getting any buzzing in my foot pegs, my clutch hand, or in my seat. If I do sit up a little higher, I do catch that wind right at the top of my head. Maybe the mid-mounted footrests are making me lean forward a little bit to avoid that wind, so it's right in that sweet spot for that windshield. I'm 5'7/5'8", and I have a 30-inch inseam, so if you were taller and you weren't leaning forward, you'd catch the wind off that windshield. I think they do make taller windshields. I saw the accessory book that had quite a few windshields, but I didn't look at the heights. I know there's different materials, but I didn't look at the heights. I think there might be some taller windshields for this if you are taller. This thing seems to be working just fine for me. Slow speed riding is really comfortable too. The balance of this is a bottom heavy engine, so the balance is really down low. It's not top heavy at all. Again, extremely usable motorcycle. accommodating, but then it just has that slight, little bit extra, slight performance, slight power, character. It's a good balance of accessibility and character, which means it's a perfect motorcycle for me. I love this fourth gear. I don't know how I feel about the suspension. I feel like the places that they've skimmed costs is on the suspension on this. The suspension, mag wheels, a single disc in the front. They're not using the Brembos on this model. This is the Nissan brakes, which I don't mind at all because most of my Japanese bikes have Nissan brakes and I've never had an issue. They've performed as well as I needed them to. And I haven't had an issue on the brakes on this anyway, so they'll probably treat me nicely for the lifetime that I own this bike. If you were to put this in the scheme of the product line of Triumph, I'd say this is probably on the low end of the line. This is probably bottom of the line Triumph right now, especially since they've discontinued it. It's something that they don't believe in enough to keep going in the direction that the rest of the bike line is going. But as a bottom of the line bike, I try and look at where the compromises are, and I'm not finding very many. I think probably where they skimped is on this suspension. You have non-adjustable traditional forks that look like they come off my 1980 Yamaha XS 400. Nothing very special about them. They're non-adjustable. And then the rear coilover shocks, they're handsome enough, but I kind of feel around corners at speed they're a bit sloppy. The suspension's a bit splashy. So I think that's probably where the money was saved on this model. They do offer aftermarket Fox rear shocks. I don't see anything about front shock upgrades. But if you got a $9,000 bike and you spend 700 quid on rear shocks, you're pushing this thing up into R9T money. Or actually, you're pushing it up into probably Thruxton money. You're getting close to a cheap Thruxton if you start adding on all the stuff. The seat's alright. It gets a little hard after about an hour or so it gives you an excuse to get off the bike and admire it. So I'm going to hit my first 100 miles. 500-mile break-in, 1 month or 500 miles is your first service. So it really does behoove you to ride this thing as much as you can within the parameters of break-in so that you can take most advantage of that first service. I've just been noticing riding through this slow stuff where I'm working the clutch as much as I am, that this torsion-assisted clutch is very smooth. I don't know if it's called the torsion-assisted clutch. It's whatever Triumph calls their slipper clutch. The clutch pull is not as heavy, definitely not as heavy as the BMW clutch pull. It's actually even smoother than the 125 Mutt that we have. That clutch is a freaking anvil. Again, it goes down to the accessibility or usability of this bike. I think this is on all of the models, this torque-assisted or this torsion-assisted clutch. It is really a nice touch to making you want to stay on the bike longer than you would otherwise. 99 miles. Come on, baby. Bring me to 100.
If you like that video and you want to see more like them, hit like, share, and subscribe.